Welcome to the Delray Beach Public Library's Top Tech Trends to Grow Your Business, a fireside chat with Amber Mack. My name is Ben Kahn, Instruction and Innovation Librarian at the Delray Beach Public Library and your host for today. Please take a moment to familiarize yourself with the chat window and ensure that your microphone is muted during the presentation. You are welcome to enter questions or comments into the chat at any time, and we will do our best to respond to as many as possible toward the end of the presentation. Our guest today, Amber Mack, has been helping businesses with the strategic use of innovative technologies since the dot-com boom of the late 90s and early 2000s. A dedicated entrepreneur, she has written and co-written 2 best-selling books, runs her own digital consulting agency, has been a keynote speaker for hundreds of events internationally, and is a popular host for radio and television. She co-hosts a weekly Sirius XM radio show called The Feed, which focuses on the latest trends in technology and innovation. Further, her podcast, The AI Effect, has won multiple awards, and her work in general has received accolades from high-profile clients such as motivational speaker Tony Robbins, entrepreneur Gary Vaynerchuk, and YouTube co-founder Stephen Chen. Amber is a native of Prince Edward Island, Canada, and has a home in Delray Beach, where she has been a supporter of the library for many years. Please join me in welcoming Amber Mack.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to being here today, and just wanted to let people know who are watching right now that we want to make this as interactive as possible, so feel free, as was just mentioned, to drop your questions or comments into the chat. I can see those come in as we go, and looking forward to answering all those questions that people may have around how technology can help you grow your business. And I know especially right now, it's a challenge to grow any business, and it's hopefully is something that we'll be able to address throughout this conversation.
Absolutely, Amber. I mean, it goes without saying that COVID-19 has had an enormous impact on society and on business at large. One effect in particular has been the sudden increase in people working from home and the attractiveness of jobs that allow this kind of arrangement, as well as small business entrepreneurs that want to start a business from home. Would you say, is remote work the new normal? Are there particular resources that you recommend for those considering remote work, or looking for remote jobs, or looking to hire remote candidates?
It's a really good question, and I think that when we talk about remote work, we're going to see more and more that this is the new normal for a lot of people who have the ability to work remotely, because of course it's not everybody who's able to work from their home. But at the end of the day, I think it's something that a lot of businesses are going to have to offer in the future. And it's interesting because when we talk about the future of remote work, I was just doing an event on the future of work recently. And one of the things that we talked about is that once you've given people access to work from home, it's hard to then go and take it away. And I compared it to the evolution of Starbucks as one example. So in the early days of Starbucks, everybody was talking about Starbucks as that third place where you would go and you would gather with friends or colleagues and have conversations. And it really was a place where Starbucks expected people to come into their stores and gather together. But then eventually they started to realize that, okay, you know what, some people like to go through the drive-thru, some people maybe even like the mobile pickup through the app, and they started to offer other ways for you to be able to get your Starbucks coffee. Now, if they decided that they were going to take those things away at this point, it would probably be problematic because you've essentially trained people to develop new habits. And I mention that because I think the same thing is going to happen with remote work. Once you've let a massive number of people work from home and you start to build a relationship of trust, it's really difficult to take that back for the people who enjoy working from home because it perhaps offers them more flexibility. At the same time, I'm not naive, and all of the data points in the same direction, saying that when it comes to remote work, there are many people who want an option to work in a hybrid model. So some days it's at home, some days it's in the workplace. And then I think there's a layering on top of that of the reality that we face in remote work, where especially during a pandemic like COVID-19, there's additional stress, especially if you're doing virtual learning with your kids. And so many people are overwhelmed and don't really know how to work at home in a healthy way. So I guess, to simplify that answer, I think that remote work is here to stay. And I think it's going to be a challenge for leaders and employers to figure out how they're going to design this sort of hybrid model that accounts for the personalized needs of everybody. And that's going to be the challenge in the future.
Right. All right. So with that, and talking about different ways we can adapt during COVID-19 and everything, with everything currently going on, what then do you see as the top accelerating tech trends that are going to be affecting businesses in the coming years?
Well, there are a number of trends, and there are four that I want to dive into. But before we get there, and you mentioned the word acceleration, which is something a lot of people have been talking about during the past few months. And if we look at e-commerce as one example, there are many experts out there who talk about the fact that with e-commerce, we've seen an acceleration and progress of 5 years of new technology happen within mere months. So it's something to remember that COVID-19 has again accelerated where we're at right now. And I like to share this quote in my presentation from Graham Wood, that change has never happened this fast before, and it will never, ever be this slow again. And this has never been more true than today. So we know that our fast future has always been at our doorstep, but we didn't expect it to come kind of rushing in during the COVID-19 pandemic the way that it has. So the four trends that I want to focus on, the first one is on the communication front. And this is important for the average consumer as well as business owners. We know based on data that when it comes to communicating, more and more we're using voice as a way to communicate. In fact, we saw last year from ComScore that 50% of all smartphone users are using voice search technology. That means they're using voice assistants in their phones or smart speakers at home in some capacity. And again, and we're going to hear this term over and over again, that's in a state of acceleration. When people are at home more and they're using smart speakers more and they're interacting using voice and they're listening to podcasts, we know that voice and audio is something that's here to stay. If we look to cities like Las Vegas as another example, in that city over the past couple of years, they've made it possible for people in that city to be able to use their smart speakers to get information about things like which parks have tennis courts, when is the next council meeting, what is the status of my building permit. So they use Amazon Alexa, and if you have one at home, you're able to, again, ask questions about what's happening in the city of Las Vegas. And you may think when we think about voice, okay, well, this is just another trendy thing that you can do in Las Vegas. But what's really interesting about this is one of the reasons they did this is that they believe that smart speakers and voice actually makes information more accessible. And why is that? Well, a new smartphone can cost $1,000 or $1,500, and a new laptop about the same. And yet you can buy a smart speaker today for $30, $40, $50. So again, it opens up more information. The second trend that I want to talk about, so after communication, is the future of transportation, but more specifically machines. And we know that in the future, we're moving quickly towards this idea of a human and machine partnership. The idea being that over the coming years, we're going to have to work alongside machines in one capacity or another. If we look at Japan as one example when it comes to care, they actually have a robot strategy in that country, and they've said that 4 out of 5 care recipients will be taken care of in part by a robot as of the end of last year. Now imagine that in a state of acceleration because of COVID, knowing that staff members in long-term care facilities have been getting sick, they need more support, and so a country like Japan is well positioned to be able to use these machines to help in these scenarios. We're also seeing machines and robots in terms of the division of labor, and this is a really key point. As we move forward to 2025 and we think about the rate of automation and working alongside machines, I wanted to take a second just to show this chart. In 2018, that's only a couple of years ago, as far as the division of labor, about 71% of labor was done by humans and 29% by machines. As we move to 2025, we see that division of labor at almost 50-50. So we know that machines are part of the future we're going into. And then finally, just for this trend in terms of transportation and machines, if we look at one of the most popular machines out there, these are robots like Spot the Robot Dog. And this is a robot dog that has been used in a number of different scenarios. In Singapore is one example to encourage people to physically distance within parks. It's been used in manufacturing. If you don't know what this dog is all about, I'm going to show you a really short video.
Hi, I'm Russell, and this is Spot. So you've probably seen this robot before, maybe hauling a truck or dancing to Bruno Mars's Uptown Funk. It's the first of this generation of semi-autonomous four-legged robots, and it does a lot more than just make videos for the internet. For about a month now, Boston Dynamics has been putting Spot to work, leasing units out to industry partners and seeing how this kind of robot holds up in the real world.
So we're seeing Spot being used on construction sites, in scenarios in terms of accompanying first responders if there's an earthquake, going places where humans can't go. And before I get to the last two trends, I just wanted to ask people in the chat right now, how worried are you about this idea of this human and machine partnership when we think about the future of business and those numbers I showed you as far as the division of labor? So we would love to get your comments on that. Let us know right now in the chat. The last two I want to mention, I'll do these quickly. The future of wellness. This is a trend in terms of technology that I think is going to be really exciting for individuals, especially as we work at home more often. And there are many examples of wearables that can help when it comes to managing our future. One that I use on a regular basis is called Whoop. And this is a band, and it does similar things to the Apple Watch, but you don't have to take it off to charge it. You only charge it once a week on your wrist. And it gives you all of this data, whether or not you have an increased heart rate variability, it tracks your sleep, your resting heart rate, all of that information. So it gathers a huge amount of data. And one of the reasons I love this is if we think about remote work and we think about sitting more, I've not sat as much as I have in the past year, and it's had an effect on my health. But I know with this, again, I know I want to reach a certain level of strain. I'm wearing one right now just so people can get a chance to see what it looks like. And then the battery just slides on top. So you put that on once a week for about 30, 40 minutes, and it's all charged up. This is just one example of many technologies that exist out there to help us better manage our health. And the last thing I'm going to mention is the future of automation and work. And this is the thing I think for small business owners where I see the biggest opportunity. And yes, it's true when we talk about the future of automation and work, you're going to see stats out there like this from Bloomberg that nearly 50% of jobs are at risk of changing in the coming decades. And I see already that Trish in the chat, Trish is saying she's not all that worried about the future of work, but many people will be, especially as they look at this chart and they see in the bottom right-hand quadrant that in red, those red bubbles, those are the jobs that are most at risk, like waiters, retail sales, cashiers, personal care aides. And this was done a couple of years ago. So again, imagine that acceleration in terms of COVID-19 that is changing things so quickly. But where is the opportunity for small business owners? Well, there are plenty of examples of tasks that we do in our day that can be automated and apps that we can use. And if we think about this, here's a quick one. If you're managing your health and you want to track calories, there's an app out there called Calorie Mama that will let you point your phone and the camera at any food you're eating, and it will break down the nutritional content of that food. So you can see again how easy it is to track the food that is in front of you. There's a couple others out there in terms of apps that can be used that will help you throughout your day. If you have a small business and you want to automate video marketing, there is an app out there called Wibbits that is a fantastic tool to create little short social media videos. So essentially it lets you stitch together these videos. Instead of costing thousands and thousands of dollars, you can do this, as they say, within about 7 minutes. Choose the format of your video that you want to create for social media, add clips, add text, give it some punchy music, all within this incredibly robust web app. Well, this is great for small businesses if you know the right tools to use. And then finally, the third one that I will mention in terms of automation, there is an app out there that is from a company called Grammarly that you've probably heard of, because it detects your grammar. Well, this one is actually a tone detector. So in this world of remote work, if you're sending emails and you don't really know what tone they are, and you want to make sure that you don't sound defensive, you want to make sure that you sound positive, this will actually use the power of automation and artificial intelligence to give you suggestions of how you should write those emails or any copy that you may be writing to help you be more productive in your communication. And I can't imagine a more important time to think about communication than right now, when we're all working remotely and things like this will matter so much. I see a comment from Beck in there saying, I'm worried about humans having a living wage when tech automates their jobs. And I think that is a legitimate fear, especially if you don't understand how quickly this is changing. But I want to kind of reframe this today and say that if you're a freelancer or a business owner, that this is also an opportunity to recognize some of that technology can help you, but only if you know how to find the right technology to help grow your business. So that is the longest answer ever to the 4 trends that are in a state of acceleration during COVID-19.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've been talking about automation and, its effect on the job market and everything. One side of technology that kind of ties into that a lot is, the concept of artificial intelligence. You've co-hosted a podcast called The AI Effect that won gold for Best Marketing Communications at the 2020 ACA Awards Gala. You've also interviewed others on the societal implications of AI with built-in bias and discrimination, as well as the need for algorithmic transparency from big tech companies. Myself, I was watching a debate yesterday between Jaron Lanier and Martine Rothblatt, sort of, going back and forth between, the advantages and disadvantages of AI, the worries that people have. And, it's a really interesting debate, both on a business level, a societal level, and a philosophical level. The questions I have for you, first of all, what is it exactly that we're talking about when we refer to artificial intelligence nowadays? What do you see as the potential benefits of the technology, and what concerns do you have about it?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. And, so often we use the term artificial intelligence as this really general term, and then we just throw all these different technologies into it. And when we think about the future of AI, unfortunately, when I'm at events, I often get asked the same question over and over again. And the question is this: will AI kill us all? That is the number one question I get answered when we talk about the future of AI. And one of the reasons is that we're inundated with images out there, and they're fearful images that look like this. We see images in the media. We see technology leaders like Elon Musk. When he talks about our future, he says we'll be lucky if the robots of the future enslave us as pets. But I want to kind of bring it back. When we talk about AI, we're talking about computers or machines that are able to be intelligent, not necessarily yet like humans. They don't necessarily have feelings just yet, but they're able to learn. And that's the key component to artificial intelligence. So I'll give you an example. When I talked about that app called Calorie Mama, what it's able to do, it's learning because it has this massive database of photos and what food looks like, and it's learning over time and getting better at that. That used to be a uniquely human thing, but now we see with software and machines that they can do that as well. Now, in terms of the fear about the future of artificial intelligence, I would say that one of the things people should be fearful of is things like AI warfare. That's a legitimate concern. If we think about the future of war where there aren't human casualties, how does that change the conversation around warfare? I know this is a business chat, but these are the conversations that we all have to think about in the future. And I think at the end of the day, when we think about the future of businesses, this is where I am optimistic, because I think that there are parts of jobs and businesses that can be automated, some of those mundane tasks, so that we can, as humans, do the things that we're really good at, right? So you may think, okay, well, you know what, do people love editing? Do they love taking, hours and hours to put together a social media video that only 100 people are going to see and it's taken them 5 days? For a small business owner, that's just a huge expense and in some ways a huge waste of time, which is why I recommend Wibbits. So when we look at the skills of the future, and that's, I think, where we should head with this conversation, if we know that automation is in our future, we can look at the World Economic Forum where they talk about skills of the future in terms of the growing skills, these important skills here in blue, things like analytical thinking and innovation, creativity, originality, critical thinking, analysis, problem solving, leadership, emotional intelligence. I don't have to tell you that these are uniquely human skills. So when I think and I get excited about the opportunities that exist in the future, it's because I imagine that if we can hone some of these skills and work on these skills, we can run better businesses, and some of the things that maybe are taking us too much time and costing too much money can be automated. And so for small business owners, they have to really think about technology choices. You know, something you're using 5 years ago probably isn't the right choice for 2021 because there's something better out there. And there's nothing that frustrates me more than seeing a small business owner or entrepreneur or really anyone who's wasting time with technology that's outdated, that's overpriced, that isn't relevant and isn't making their lives better. So that's what I mean about investing in learning and finding those opportunities that exist with some of this new technology, and not living in that time of you know, Terminator-like images where you think everything is doom and gloom. I mean, we've had a terrible year. We don't need to spend more time thinking like that.
I think, you know, there's multiple ways to think about AI, and, you know, you can either look at it as, you know, like you said, that gloom and doom and, you know, something that's going to replace us, or you can see it as an extension of human intelligence, something that, you know, we're growing with. You know, we also have a question from Christina in the chat that says, I'm a freelance writer and editor. I'm always juggling a lot of balls. Does AI have the ability to help me stay organized?
I think there is the promise of AI to help you stay organized, Christina. I think that's a really great question. You know, if we look at Google Assistant as one example, you know, smart speakers or Google Assistant on your phone, the idea is that it's supposed to get smarter over time and anticipate maybe what your days look like and warn you if, hey, there's a traffic jam on the I-95 and they know that you always leave at 7:30. Eventually, the promise is that it will tell you, like, hey, I know you usually leave about this time, and I want to let you know that today the traffic is really bad. Maybe you should take an alternate route. So I think the promise of AI does exist. There are lots of tools out there to help you stay organized. A great one that I talk about a lot is called Otter.ai. This is an artificial intelligence tool that is a transcription tool. If you're a freelance writer and you're interviewing people and you want a way to do real-time transcription, this actually plugs into Zoom. There's a fee associated with it, but if you use Google Meet to have your video interviews or audio interviews for free, Otter.ai will transcribe those interviews, and so you have a full real-time transcription instead of having to go and try to do some of that on your own. So there's a great example, Christina, of automation in the works, and in this scenario where I mentioned Google Meet and Otter.ai, it's a free tool, a combination of two tools you can use that can save you a lot of time and money. So that, I think, is the promise of AI, and honestly, every single week there are new tools like this that come out that can make your life easier, and that's why it's important to kind of have an ear to the ground and attend sessions like this so you're in a constant state of learning.
You mentioned adopting new technologies and keeping up with the most recent trends and everything. We receive requests often from local small business owners wanting to know how they can better use social media for marketing or how to make their businesses more discoverable through search engine optimization. You've also written a book called Power Friending, which was a bestseller on using social media for these kind of purposes. What recommendations do you have for those who understand the potential value of these new technologies for growing business, but aren't sure how to get started or feel overwhelmed with the idea of doing it themselves?
Well, I think, despite the fact that I said keep an ear to the ground, it doesn't mean that you have shiny object syndrome, which is to say that there's going to be some tools out there that aren't relevant to you. You know, maybe your kids or nieces or nephews are using TikTok. But if your audience or your customers are not on TikTok, it's good to see what's happening on TikTok, but I wouldn't spend a lot of time creating content for TikTok if your audience isn't there. So the first question I would ask yourself is, what audience is most important for you? So if you are trying to get media attention, I don't think anyone would argue with this statement, but Twitter is where every single newsroom journalist and producer is spending their entire day. So even though Twitter isn't that much fun and can be kind of a difficult place to be sometimes, times. If you want to get media attention, it's absolutely critical from a public relations standpoint. When it comes to video content, I think in terms of organic video, so unpaid video, there's a lot you can do right now on LinkedIn as far as creating videos there up to 10 minutes long. They can be live or not live, but to really build your professional brand. There's also an app that I use on a regular basis that I highly recommend called InShot. And InShot is this great little lightweight app that will allow you to edit videos on your phone. It makes it super, super easy. And this again can save you thousands and thousands of dollars. So often I think I see people kind of underperform on social media because they don't actually put out enough content to stand out in the crowd. So this allows you very quickly to create these short little videos. It's a few bucks a month. And then that can help you produce more regular content. So my advice for people who are thinking, hey, I want to use social media, I want to get attention out there, but I don't know where to start. I think video content travels the furthest in terms of reach and engagement. So I would invest in video content, but that doesn't mean you need a big setup. A lot of that can be shot and done on your phone. Audio is key as well, so you may want to invest in a little microphone for your phone. But again, producing more content than you think you have to, and bulk producing it. Nobody wants to do a video every day, you're exhausted. Pick one day, maybe every couple of weeks, where you spend 2 or 3 hours creating social media content, and then sort of trickle it out through those feeds for the next few weeks. That's a very effective and productive way to produce content.
You talked a little bit about the audio revolution, the trend toward podcasting and listening to more audio. I've run podcasting classes here on working with Adobe Audition and other tools for those who want to get into podcasting. Are there others that you recommend, or could you talk a little bit more about that audio revolution?
Yeah, I mean, podcasting has been around for many years. In 2004, it finally became a little bit more mainstream, but nothing like today. And so now in 2021, a podcast is really inexpensive to create. You could, do a weekly podcast, but what I would even recommend is you do a series. So a series could be as little as 4 episodes or 6 episodes. Really focus it. Release them over, maybe one a week or one every 2 weeks, and build your audience that way. And one of my favorite tools out there's a couple. One is Zencaster that makes it really easy to record your audio podcasts. And we're showing that on screen here, and you can record video as well. And another tool that I use a lot is called Anchor.fm. And this makes it easy to get your podcast into the podcast feed. So the Apple Podcast Store, the Google Podcast Store, Spotify. So again, super, super affordable to use these tools. You can record right within this web application. And this is probably the one that makes it the easiest. So this is a great way. Audio is so intimate and so powerful. That's the thing that we often forget about audio. We think, oh, well, this is just another trend. But when you're in someone's ears and you're trying to build relationships as a business or as a brand, that is one of the most intimate ways that you can build a relationship, because the person is out walking their dog or in their car, and it's just a different relationship than you would build in terms of them being distracted by other things on their phone. So I highly recommend this as one way to create content. So you're seeing video content and audio content. So generally speaking, multimedia, we all have to think about that when it comes to social media.
Sure. Another thing, for those maybe just starting out with a new business, or getting ideas for a business. Google and Facebook built their successes largely on business models based on advertising. There's a lot of new business models out there. You've seen increases in the so-called freemium model, pushes towards software as a service. Talk about some of the new business models and strategies that have arisen in the digital age. Are there any that you feel are more effective than others, or what do you see coming in that regard?
Yeah, that is another really good question. And I see there's also another question coming in. So keep those questions and comments coming. And if you have any suggestions that I'm just missing out, please throw them into chat. I'm all about learning as well. So I think that you're right in terms of the subscription service for software. I think that is becoming more and more normal. I think many small business owners and entrepreneurs will recognize that, hey, there's some subscription services that you aren't even using anymore, cancel those. Every couple of months I go through my credit card bill and I think, hey, I'm not using these apps that I subscribe to anymore. I'm going to get rid of them. So when I talk about apps like InShot as one example, and it's a monthly subscription fee of just a few dollars, it's worth actually paying for that, because if you don't, many times in the free version of that app, your data can be sold, and it's much better to pay even if a small little amount when you're using some of these new tools and apps as well. So I do want to mention that first and foremost. The second thing that I'll mention when it comes to some of the trends that I'm seeing out there with software is that I would not commit on a long-term basis to any software suite. Like if someone wants you to sign in for 2 years, I'd be like, that's a big red flag, because things are just getting better all the time and constantly improving. So I'd say 1 year on the outside, and you may want, leading up to that 1 year to do some research and choose something else. And then the last thing I'll say when it comes to advertising and paid advertising, and this is so important, and I'm curious if people in the chat have the same opinion. Organic reach on Facebook and Instagram is increasingly difficult. If you don't know what organic reach means, it just means not paying any money to promote your content. That's getting harder and harder all the time on Facebook and Instagram, because the algorithm is pushing the paid content and sometimes the outrageous content. And so even if you actually have a small budget a day, even just $5 a day, there's this great article on Social Media Examiner, which is one of my go-to blogs for understanding what to do in social media. And over on Social Media Examiner, one of the things that they do is they have this great post on Instagram that breaks down about Instagram that breaks it down and says, for $5 a day, this is what you can do, and this is an easy way to invest in social media. So I think that paid advertising has to be a reality for your small business, but it doesn't have to be super expensive. This is the article that I was just mentioning. So it's a good one from a couple years ago, but still stands. So for $5 a day, this is what they recommend. And it's a simple way to understand how to get your content out there at a very small price. And again, this website, Social Media Examiner, if you want to just bookmark this right now, I have no affiliation with them, but I will say that they have the best how-tos when it comes to social media marketing. And I have to give Chris a shout out, because Chris is behind the scenes here and he's doing all of the switching, and I'm randomly mentioning things and I can see him, running around to try to find things. So we didn't plan this, but he's just fast.
Let's see. We've talked a little bit about, advertising and, building your business through social media advertising. I also want to talk a little bit about some other services that people have been looking at, especially through the pandemic. You've got a lot of people who've been out of work and are just looking for ways to pay the bills. What are your thoughts on the gig economy and freelancing sites like Fiverr and Upwork, or sharing economy apps like Uber and Airbnb? Are they helping? Are these a good way to build a business, or is the better way just to go through straight direct to customer marketing?
Well, I think the gig economy from a worker perspective, it certainly serves a role, especially for those people who want a flexible work environment, need to make money right away. I think there's 100% a role there. So I would not put the weight of the disadvantages of the gig economy on the workers whatsoever. I would just say, as individuals, perhaps we should put the pressure on, the Ubers of the world in terms of paying fair wages and thinking about their workers more seriously, giving them options to make a living wage, knowing that, it would be the right thing to do. So for me, it feels like, workers, we're all trying to pay the bills. We're trying to do what we can. And in the gig economy, for people who are shopping for other people, driving other people around, this is a hustle and this is a grind. And it's great that we have those tools, but I think it's difficult, long term, to depend on that as a source of revenue unless you're willing to commit your whole life to that. It's hard to make a living wage doing that. Some people may disagree in the chat, but I think at the end of the day, it can kind of close the gaps. Maybe there's a few months you're off work and you want something to do. And Fiverr can be fun too, right? If you're creative and you want an outlet. And also for entrepreneurs and small business owners, head over to Fiverr and see what you can get in terms of logo design and website design and audio producing and creation. Like there are really talented people over on Fiverr that can help you out. But again, I think the gig economy, it does have some holes in terms of how it is treating workers, and I do worry about the longevity of that. Chris is just bringing Fiverr up here because I know there's probably a lot of people, we're mentioning a million websites fast and furiously. So this is Fiverr, where you can go to find freelance services for your business at a reasonable price. Logo design, website design, voiceover, video explainer, social media. It's a great place to start if you're trying to do something creative in the digital space and you have a very limited budget. You have access to incredibly creative people through this platform.
Right. You mentioned, some of the problems, with the gig economy, and that, some of it is, it's more like you said, on the companies that run them, and whether they're treating people ethically. Interesting thing about that, another technology which claims to be the new wave, and being able to, I guess, get rid of some of the middleman, and enable more sort of person-to-person business, and is blockchain. And this is one that interests me a bit. It's a technology that could potentially change a lot about how business is conducted on the internet. Some even argue that it may be changing the internet itself. What opportunities or changes do you see coming for businesses and other organizations regarding blockchain, or is it too soon to tell?
Well, I think it's important to pay attention to what blockchain is. And if you don't know what it is, in really simplistic terms, you can think about it like a digital ledger. So I'll give you an example. Let's say there's a car company, and a car company wants you to know that they've sourced materials, maybe it's an electric car, like lithium, from an ethical mine. And that's important in that conversation. Perhaps what they've done to show you and be transparent about the supply chain is that through the blockchain, they've allowed you to know that that has been sourced from an ethical mine overseas. And that's one way for them to demonstrate that. There are many different ways in terms of how blockchain can be an interesting advantage in the future. Real estate's another example. There are lots of different industries paying attention to it. I would just say, for most small businesses and entrepreneurs that I know, I don't know if blockchain is something they need to be an expert at right now, but just like cryptocurrency, it's certainly worth reading the articles that come out to understand what trends are going to last, and perhaps those trends that are really just demonstrating that we're in a bubble right now. So I think it's one of those sort of, topics that isn't necessarily practically relevant, but it certainly is interesting from a long-term perspective to pay attention to some of these trends, because we see how fast things seep into our lives.
Right. I mean, we have seen, a growth in a lot of new, blockchain startups. There's, considerable, there's new cryptocurrencies popping up every day, it seems like. And I guess, you mentioned that we are kind of in a bubble now. Does it bear any resemblance to the dot-com boom of the late 90s and early 2000s when you got your start? Do you see any of that happening?
Yeah, I mean, if you remember back to the late 1990s, and I'm guessing there are people who are watching this right now who remember that time, when we saw the bubble out there, it wasn't just a bubble in terms of companies that were, rising up and getting, tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars, and then a year later they were broke. There were like mini bubbles throughout that time. And I'm thinking about the domain name industry specifically. I don't know if anyone remembers this, but if you had a domain name that was like digitalisland.com, like that could have been worth $1 million. So kind of a bubble. And then eventually people kind of figured out, hey, maybe we don't need that. Maybe we can, find another domain name. They're not going to be worth as much. I mean, we don't see people forking out the kind of cash they were at that time. for domain names. And I look at NFTs, I look at cryptocurrency, I think of, we are kind of in a bubble right now. And it's not to say that they won't exist in the future, but I think the markets will just kind of calm down over maybe the months and years to come, because we did see that, you're absolutely right, with the dot-com boom. And, I was at one company where we had raised $20+ million, and a year or two later, we were totally broke. And I'll never forget it, because we had rented, I was not in charge of the money, I was quite young when I worked there, but we had rented trees. And I remember thinking how odd it was that people came in to water these trees and plants in our office. And yet we were all these young people in our 20s, like we could have done that on our own. Like there was money wasted everywhere I looked. And it was just a really different time, and a huge bubble that burst and caused a lot of damage in its wake as well.
You mentioned NFTs, which I believe is non-fungible tokens. Can you explain what that is?
Yes. So if you want to see a bubble right now, I think all you have to do is go to Google right now, search NFTs and maybe art, and then you'll start to see articles about NFTs. So I'm going to try to make this as simple as possible. So, let's say you're a digital artist. So you're someone who creates art in the digital space. NFTs are really interesting because this gives you a chance, again, to assign not necessarily just value, but to say that a piece of digital art is an original and there's only one of them, and one other person can own that digital art. And most recently, we've seen examples of artists who have sold art for hundreds of thousands of dollars, because someone wanted that original piece of art and that ownership. And then people say, oh, that's crazy. Why would you want to? This is an example Chris just brought up from Business Insider. Beeple, who is probably one of the most popular artists right now. As you can see on this article, the buyer of Beeple's $60 million artwork now says NFTs are a huge risk as talk of a bubble grows. So people have been paying a lot to own these digital assets. I actually don't think it's I think we're in a bubble, but I don't think the idea of NFTs is all that crazy. I interviewed a musician recently from a band called Our Lady Peace, Rain Maida, and one of the things he talked about, like as a musician, to be able to actually, assign ownership to a piece of digital music, that changes the game for them. Do they still need record companies and producers, or could they sell that piece of digital music to a really hardcore fan directly, right? And it cuts out some of the middle men and women in that process. So I do want to say that, again, we're in a bubble, but I think what happens in these bubbles is like, it's like going through a washing machine, right? Like everything is just crazy and bubbly, but then when it comes out, everything dries out, we get back to kind of basics and our clothes are clean. So just hold on.
Yeah, I think, that whole idea of this sort of digital provenance that, blockchain is enabling, that's one of the neat things for me. I have a background as a musician as well. I worked as a trombonist for a number of years, and it is something really neat to be able to see that and, see the changes that are happening in the online world with regard to music and art and,
And collecting things. Like this is one of the things that Rain said in our interview, which I'll never forget, is that people collect things all the time, and they assign what they think is an appropriate level of value to that thing. Look at, trading cards. Like I've never been into baseball cards, but we know there are people who go on eBay and they're just scouring eBay for, certain cards as collectibles. So I just don't see why that's different physically or digitally. So I understand the role that NFTs can play and the blockchain in that regard, because we always do that. We assign value to things that maybe, not everybody sees the value in.
So at this time, we're at about quarter till. I'd like to take some questions from our audience. If anybody has a question for Amber that you'd like answered, please go ahead and type it into the chat.
I see one from Christina. What was the name of the app for getting a podcast listed? I think that Trish has put that in. That's anchor.fm. That's a really good question and a really great and easy app to use, just to simplify the process. So we've brought it up here again. And it makes it dead. Like this is the cool thing about where we are right now, probably why I'm so optimistic, is that it truly is accessible for anyone who has digital tools and technology like a laptop or a phone to create really incredible, compelling content. But it's just a matter of how you spend that time and create that content as well.
Okay, Christina also says, are there any project management apps that you would recommend?
That is a good question. So I don't know, Chris, I'm just going to ask Chris in the studio this. Is Basecamp, I used to use Basecamp. I don't use a lot of project management apps, but yeah. So Basecamp is it 37 Signals? I haven't thought about them for a while, or maybe that was a blog. Yes, here we go.
That's the name of this company.
Okay, so here's Basecamp. You can take a look at that. I used to use this a lot when we were doing project management. So this is a great tool to try. Now I use within our company, we don't use tools like this so much, but we do use Slack as a collaboration tool. So that's a good option as well if you're looking for a collaboration tool. But you can't go wrong with Basecamp. I mean, they've been around forever, and they have a really good reputation as well.
Let's see. The next question says, where would you promote a podcast?
I love that question because it's promoting podcasts is actually really quite difficult outside of the actual podcast stores that exist. So in terms of promoting a podcast, I think you're really left with the digital channels that you use in terms of podcast promotion. So depending on where your audience is, I mean, Twitter can be a great place to promote podcasts. Instagram can be another place. And I would just say that one of the most important things is with your podcast is probably going to be audio. But if you can, and you're interviewing people or you're the one hosting the podcast, always record the video content, because there's nothing more compelling than having a little clip to promote your podcast and put the link in. And then I want to recommend another tool here. If you guys like podcasting, it's called Podfollow. I just started using this recently because we produce podcasts here as well. So Podfollow is a super, super neat tool. And what it allows you to do is to get what's called a magic link for your podcast. So let's say you create a podcast and you want an easy way to promote it. You don't want to have to list the link to the episode or in the Apple Podcast Store, the Spotify Store, the Google Podcast Store. So what you can do with Podfollow is that you can basically register your podcast. So the Amber Mac Show is a podcast series I did late last year. And you basically have one link that you can promote. So podfollow.com/The Amber Mac Show. And depending on where the person is clicking on that link, it will redirect them to the appropriate store. So if they're on an iOS device, meaning an iPhone, it's like a magic link. It will take them to the Apple Podcast Store. If they're on an Android device, it will take them to Google Podcasts. If they're on a desktop, it will take them to the website where you have the podcast listed. I think this is one of the best kept secrets in podcasting to streamline the process of promoting your podcast. So again, that's called Podfollow.
Okay, great. Adele had another question about Otter.ai regarding their audio editing capabilities. She asks, is there any good filtering? Is it good for filtering out irrelevant noises such as ums, ahs, coughing, and sneezing? Is it something that
I'm only laughing because I feel like, Chris, we get asked that question all the time.
You say it records.
Yeah, right now, if you say it, at least our experience has been it records it. That's just what it does. But listen, when we speak about the power of artificial intelligence, even within things like Microsoft Teams, they're saying that the AI technology will eventually be able to detect things like a dog barking in the background and silence that sound. So if Otter.ai does not do it today as you want it with the ums and the ahs, trust me, we are weeks or months away from that being an option. And maybe it's just as simple as they see your recording and it says, would you like to remove the ums and ahs? And you click a button and it removes them. That's how automation works.
Right. Yeah. And if it can't be automated at this point, I'm certain, you can find somebody on Fiverr who is willing to edit your podcast for you and take out those ums and ahs. I mean,
Exactly. Yeah, you're exactly right.
Let's see. Next is what Gisela asked, what's the app that you mentioned that gives full info about your meal?
Yes. So that was called Calorie Mama. And, this is cool, not just if you're trying to have a food diary in terms of what you're eating to eat better, but also to understand the power of artificial intelligence. So they use something here called deep learning. So basically the camera has deep learning technology, which is a term that lives in the category of artificial intelligence. So your camera basically is able to identify what you're eating. So it knows right here, if we look at this photo, that you're eating potentially a mozzarella caprese salad, or maybe it has strawberries on it, and you pick whichever one it is, and then you keep that as part of your food diary. So it's available for iPhones and Android devices, again, super powerful, super interesting. I believe there's a small fee associated with this as well. But again, if this allows you to make changes in your life to live healthy in a healthier way, then it could be worth the small subscription fee. But when you're not using it anymore, cancel that fee.
Okay. Let's see. Does anyone else have another question? While we're waiting on other questions, I had one. We mentioned earlier about autonomous vehicles and all of that. Talk a little bit about self-driving vehicles and how far are we along on that? How soon can we expect fully self-driving cars?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we're going to see self-driving cars everywhere in the near future. Florida is a leader right now when it comes to autonomous vehicle research and testing, which is interesting to watch what's happening there. There are, generally speaking, 5 levels of autonomous vehicles, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Some cars have the level 2 capabilities or 3 capabilities to be on a highway and be kind of hands-free for a short amount of time, although I don't think they recommend you go hands-free. But I do think that this is a future that is going to happen, but I do think it's going to be relegated to certain communities or certain highways that have the technology and the infrastructure to manage autonomous vehicles. So I know outside of Orlando, there's a testing strip, a highway strip right now, where they're testing autonomous vehicles. And you can imagine in communities like the Villages in Florida, where autonomous shuttles make sense because it's a confined area. On college campuses at the University of Michigan, they've been testing autonomous shuttles for the past couple of years. So I don't think we're all going to be getting in autonomous vehicles, but it certainly is in our future. And the last thing I'll say about this is I interviewed an expert on this recently, and he said something that I cannot get out of my mind. He said, we're having these conversations about autonomous vehicles, like when's this going to happen? And we're doubting it's going to happen. And he says, as someone immersed in the industry, he believes that in a decade or more, you may not be able to drive a car because the technology has shown us that humans are just terrible drivers. He said, so there might come a point where we don't even want humans driving cars because they're so bad at it. And I thought that was an interesting sort of flip of the narrative that you so often hear about how autonomous vehicles don't make sense.
On the other hand, I mean, Trish has an interesting comment here. What about ethics and automation and responsibility? Can a machine be held responsible? And what rights does a machine have? These are questions that haven't quite been answered yet. But maybe you could comment on.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Trish, that is a really good point that many people are trying to figure out right now. There are countries that are working together trying to figure out the ethical implications of this human and machine partnership future that we're heading into. And I would say, am I optimistic that we're going to make the right choices? I would say no. If history shows us anything, especially with big tech companies, if you look at the people in charge of the big tech companies, I don't want these same people also making decisions about the ethical implications of AI technology, because look what they've done even with social media, right? And I think that's the big issue, is that we have people running businesses right now that, especially in big tech, that don't have the best interests of humans at heart.
So do you feel it's the government then is going to be the ones who come up with the regulations and determine the legal aspects of it, I guess? Or
I love this question because it's always so controversial to talk about government playing a role when it comes to regulation. And I would say, I probably don't totally understand. People don't understand that the government plays a role in regulation in many areas of our lives. So to me, it just makes sense that that is expanded in technology. And I'm not saying that they should have ultimate control, but I certainly wish there was more regulation when it comes to some of these big social media giants. Just like you have to jump through hoops to do things like get a driver's license, buy a house. I mean, there's regulations everywhere in our society to protect us. But unfortunately, big tech has been like a snowball rolling down the hill, and it's a free free fall right now, and nobody has been able to catch that snowball.
That maybe was my question is, if the big tech companies aren't doing it themselves, then who's responsible?
Yeah, right. I mean, it's a fair question. And I think, and also we have issues, I think, with people in government who don't have a good handle on technology, right? And I don't want to get political, but the only politician that I've heard really talk about technology where I believe they understood at a very basic level how it works is Andrew Yang. I mean, that's pathetic. Everybody in this day and age should have some understanding of how technology works, especially as it impacts every facet of our lives.
Let's see. I think we've got time for at least one more question. Christina asks, do you have smart speakers in your home, and do you have privacy concerns about them?
So yeah, we do have smart speakers in our home, and yes, I'm always concerned about privacy, and everybody should be concerned about privacy. But I do just want to say that the similar technology exists in your smartphone. So I'm equally as concerned about microphones in my phone, which I have on me 24/7. So, I use them because I feel for me personally, the advantages are pretty huge. And I think, on the privacy side, I can turn them off or mute them or unplug them. I'm savvy enough to know how to do that. So I use them because, again, for me, I think the advantages outweigh the potential risks. And also, probably I've gotten lazy on a privacy front over the past year when I can't really leave my home and do much. So now there's so many other things to be afraid of that it's fallen down the list of fears. You can't hug anyone right now. So there you go.
All right. Well, Amber, I want to thank you, and I want to thank everyone in the audience today for joining us for the top tech trends to grow your business, a fireside chat with Amber Mack. You can find more about Amber and all of the latest technology trends at www.ambermack.com. Please also check out the library's website at www.delraylibrary.org to learn more about upcoming events and consider making a donation to support programs like the one you've just attended. This concludes our presentation for today. Please stay safe, everyone, and we hope to see you all again soon.
Thanks so much. Hopefully next time it's in person. Thanks for having me.